every fact in the world is 3 seconds away from me, but real knowledge and wisdom is not. And that's learned by experimenting and being creative about that and being flexible and not let any preconceived ideas rule your life.
James is here to talk about money, mindset, and all the fun stuff. James, welcome to the show.
Chris, thanks so much for having me here. I love what you're doing. I love the idea of taking money conversation to the next level because it's such an important topic. And it doesn't mean let's talk stocks. It doesn't mean let's talk about inflation, although these are subjects certainly we could touch upon. But it's really about, how money affects everything in our lives. Like it affects our sense of freedom. It affects our community. It affects our ability to master the things we love doing, and that doesn't mean having a lot of money or a little money. It depends on the person, but it means having kind of a philosophy that moves your life forward. And money is a reflection of how bright and positive this philosophy is.
Absolutely.
I'm not saying positive thinking gets you money. I'm just saying you have to have a strong sense of self.
And the funny thing, James, is, we're brought up in a society, whether it's our grandparents, our parents, our surroundings, with people not wanting to talk about money. Literally, like talking about money is a bad thing. Oh, don't ask them how much money they make. Don't ask them what they invest in. Like, that's not good. Like, why is it that society has literally made money the tool, because that's all money is a tool. They've made it this evil thing. Like, it's a very weird dynamic. And it's no wonder people fear money. They fear making money. They fear all the things that come along with money. And a lot of times that stops people from getting where they want. What is it with this negative connotation that people have about money?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not necessarily negative. It's just that people conflate net worth with self-worth. So, and I know, and I'm not saying this as a judgment, like I do this and I've done it in very negative ways that's harmed my life. And, if you think money is self-worth and you're always comparing yourself to others, you're never going to have enough self-worth because there's always somebody with more money and or other things. I don't know who Elon Musk compares himself to, but at some point, like when I was in situations where I had a lot of money, like when I've gone back and forth. Like I sold my first business, then I lost all my money, then I sold the second business, lost all the money again. And whenever I had just sold a company, I would always feel so in the clouds to the point of like extreme arrogance. Like I probably was the most annoying person in the world. And then because there's three skills to money: making it, keeping it, growing it. And I was good at making it, but not keeping it. I would lose all my money. Like there was one summer, it's like 20 years ago, I lost about $1 million a week. And I just lost everything. I lost my home, lost my family, lost everything. And I was depressed and suicidal because I had thought my self-worth was beyond human. I had accomplished my job as a human. I had succeeded. If I could make it here, I could make it anywhere. And then I lost it all. So everything I had thought about myself, like, oh, I'm great, I'm smart, I have all this money, I lost it all. So I thought I was a zero. I was starting to think, oh, my kids would be better off with my life insurance policy than with me. And I would have really, dark thoughts and dark periods. And this happened to me again and again. And hopefully now I've learned a little bit more and I'm keeping it or growing it or whatever. But it's really scary. And it's not like you pass a point where it's not scary unless you have like $1 billion. It's scary all the time. And I do think that that there's shame associated with it. So people don't want to talk, oh, he might make more money than me, or so I can't say what my salary is, or I can't admit that I'm in debt or losing money, or the IRS is after me, or I'm scared about my mortgage. I can't tell my wife because she loves me because of my self-worth, my net worth, and blah, 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 and so on.
I love how you just put that together. And, I wonder, James, if we went around and we asked all the people watching this, how many of them have gone through something like that? Because I know in my life, I had I had a humble beginnings. I grew up with nothing, but then I started making a lot of money. I was a very high level financial advisor, and you were kind of in that space as a hedge fund manager. And while I was making all this money, my ego kept going up and up and up. I was probably a miserable son of a pup to get around and talk to, because I had such a big ego, because I thought I was on top of the world, like making all this money. But then very quickly that was stripped from me. It was taken from me, not just once, but 3 different times in that life cycle: early 2000s, the 2008 Great Recession, and then again in 2014. And each one of those times when I was at that peak, my ego was at its peak. You were talking about that self-worth. But then when I hit the bottom, when I lost it all and money was gone, and then I had to rebuild, I was at that vulnerable point too. And that vulnerable point, that failure, if you will, was very difficult in the moment, because you start really thinking about things. God, I've never really said this, but you did it. So I'm going to bear all too. Man, I had suicidal thoughts. I remember points in 2014 when I'd lost it all for the third time, thinking maybe this world's better without me. Maybe my wife doesn't need me. Like I'm just a hindrance. I can't do anything right. And you kind of just brought that out. But for some reason, James, we didn't throw the towel in when we were in those low points. And I bet you all the listeners too, if you guys are listening to this and you've had that moment, I want you to really think of those low points, those hard times. Like you just wanted to throw the towel in, but you didn't. James, what is it that defines you, and what is it that got you to get back up and climb to the top? I mean, I know just because I've read a lot about you, but you went down to literally having $200 and you built it back up to, tens of millions of dollars. Like what was that defining moment?
I remember, like, I sold my business and cashed out in the internet bubble. Like I didn't hold it in stock. But then I made about 15 million, and about a year later I had $143. I remember looking at my ATM account and I'm like, oh my God. And so then I called my parents. This is 20 years ago. Called my parents and I said, can I just drive down to your house and borrow $1,000? And I had 2 kids. I didn't know what would come up. I just needed, like, just in case, because I was so used to having some money around, I didn't know what could happen. And they said no, and they were very upset that I had even asked. And so I hung up the phone on them, and I was scared to death. Like I didn't really and that point wasn't like a bottom for me. Like that wasn't the point where I bounced back, because I think it's really hard to bounce back when you're really scared and really miserable. And you can't like everybody, and we've used the phrase mindset, like you can't use your mind to bounce back, because thinking is kind of what got you to the bottom. Not the lack of money, although that certainly helps, but thinking and the conditioning we have from society, from family, from friends, from community, from teachers. This conditioning is what is programming, is like the RNA of our thoughts. And you have to do things in order to bounce back. And so when I was just sad and moping around and scared I was going to lose my home, scared people would hate me, and so on and so on, the only thing that helped me bounce back, it wasn't like, oh, I've got to start thinking positive. I started doing things that I love doing.
Oh,
I didn't really love building a business, to be honest. And I didn't really love, I certainly didn't love losing money. And so I started doing things that I love doing. And I think one thing that we all love as a society, it's part of human nature, is we love being creative, and then we love being curious. This is how, as a species, we've survived. Oh, what's over there in that grove? Is there fruit? Is there an animal I can hunt? Whatever. We survive by oh, maybe I need like something sharp. I'll make a bow and arrow. I'll invent the bow and arrow. And so we've survived by being creative and by being curious. And this unleashes, all of those neurochemicals like dopamine and serotonin and all these things that make us feel good and drive us forward and drive us to keep innovating. And so there was this weird thing that happened, like, because I was so just down. I never slept because of this, and I was walking around New York City all the time, like in the middle of the night. And one time I wandered into this restaurant supply store, and for whatever reason, I bought like a bunch of waiters pads. Like I love the look and feel of waiters pads. I don't know where they are right now. They're usually around on my desk, but somebody just cleaned it. And I went to a cafe and I started writing down ideas for new businesses, ideas for books I could write, ideas for articles I could write, ideas for investment strategies, ideas for my friends. And uh, and after a few weeks or a month or two of writing down 10 ideas a day and just exercising that creativity muscle that had atrophied, I wasn't writing good ideas. I was just writing any ideas. And then just, I wasn't keeping track of it. I just throw away the ideas. But just doing that kind of unleashed this excitement, this creativity. And then when I did have an idea I wanted to pursue, I was excited for the first time in years, and I wanted to do it. And I started outlining it more. And that really helped me bounce back. And what happens when you're bouncing back is that you start to notice opportunities around you. And the opportunities are always there, but you start to notice them. Just like when you buy a Toyota Corolla, you notice all the Toyota Corollas on the road. And before that, you never notice them. Well, I was writing down all these ideas and building up that idea muscle, which had atrophied. So when I came across potential ideas or opportunities during the day, I would notice them. And over time, and it wasn't overnight, over time, I started building back, and I started new careers and new opportunities. And eventually, years later, started another business, and then another business, and then another business. And some would fail and some would succeed. And of course, this whole process had to happen again. But I had to keep creativity strong. I had to stay in physical health, because you can't be creative when you're sick in bed. I had to be emotionally healthy, which meant, you're you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself with, and you're not going to have ideas when you're arguing with your spouse, and so on. And I had to kind of come to grips with my enormous level of anxiety and regret that I had every time I lost money. And I still haven't fully, you can't really get rid of regrets and anxieties, unlike what some people say, but I think I'm better at it now. And so, yeah, creativity, though, I think led the way for me. And just writing 10 bad ideas a day down, just to exercise that idea muscle.
Well, one thing I love about the whole talk on creativity is, Earl Nightingale. Most of you know of Earl Nightingale, and if you don't, you need to get to know of him. And he had a famous recording he did. It's called The Strangest Secret in the World. And in that recording, which is about 22 minutes, he talks about success and failure. And he talks about his whole career trying to figure out what makes people successful and what makes people fail or not be successful, if you will. And he boiled it down to the simplest thing. And it's really just a universal law, but let's get to the simple thing. And that's what you said. The difference between success and failure, the difference as to why, if you go around and ask 120-year-olds if they're going to be successful at retirement, all of them will tell you absolutely yes. But then at 65, Social Security statistics say that only 5 of those 120-year-olds that were eager and optimistic will be successful. So what made that difference between the 5 and the 95? You nailed it. Creativity. The 5 did one thing different than the 95. They created their financial destiny. They created some type of business. They created a product. They created something, because like you said, once that creativity muscle or whatever, just that inner creativity comes out, it doesn't stop. You just feed it and it just starts coming and giving you more and more. But failure on the other side, which is the larger denominator at 95, that is when you start listening to other people, your sphere, your network, whatever you want to call it. And they start telling you that you can't do something, that your dreams are not ever going to happen, that, all these things that you're doing are stupid. That's a scam. That's not going to work. There's no way that could be true. That sounds too good to be true. You've heard it all. Once you start adopting your life to somebody else's ideologies, you conform. You conform to somebody else's dreams that they never achieved. When you were chasing your dreams, trying to create them, why did you give up creation and accept conformity? You didn't, which is why you did this, but you went through lots of ups and downs. I believe 20 different companies that you founded or co-founded. Yeah. And how many of them failed? What was the number? A lot of them.
A lot of them.
A lot of them. 17 or so of them failed. That's a lot of failure. Most people couldn't accept that. So, what is it that makes people that are creators different than people that conform? That's an interesting topic. And then let's take that right into money, because money is an important tool behind all of this.
Yeah, I mean, part of it is when you exercise that creativity muscle. And again, I know for me, it's not like some secret strategy, like, oh, do this like 10-step method. No, I just simply had a little pad and I wrote 10 ideas a day. And the results of doing that now over the past 20 years have been remarkable for me. I mean, I could, because so often I'll come up with ideas for other people and I'll send them cold to other people. So I'll send Google 10 ways to improve Google search, or send to Amazon 10 ways you can improve your self-publishing department. And often they'll respond, they'll get invited to places to speak or consult, or just this process has helped me in so many ways, and I'm so grateful for it. But when you start building that creativity and that curiosity, you also become flexible as to how you think about things. So for instance, I'll give an example. People say ideas are a dime a dozen, execution is everything. Maybe that's right, maybe that's wrong. But people forget that execution ideas are a subset of ideas. You got to be creative to be good at executing. So there are people who are good at it and there are people who are bad at it. So for instance, I had a friend of mine, she had a great idea for a business, and she told me now she's raising $2 million. And I'm like, why are you raising $2 million? She wants to hire software people, and then they're going to take a year to build it, and then she'll market it and, build a huge business. And I'm like, that's a horrible idea. So I told her, take your idea and you could do this manually for your first 2 or 3 or 4 customers. Her specific idea was something she could do manually, and then she wanted to automate it so it could scale to billions of people. And I said, do that as an experiment and see if people like this thing you're offering, this service that you're offering, and what suggestions people have, because that might totally change your conception of the product. And then you'll know whether it's worth raising money and whether it's worth automating and what features people actually want. Or you might know it doesn't work and it's not a good idea. And she actually ultimately moved on to something else. It wasn't really that great of an idea. So that's the difference between good execution and bad execution, is really understanding how to do small experiments and to test ideas out, so you can be very flexible as to how you think about your business, money, family, and so on. So I kind of fashion my life around this idea of experimenting. So if I have something I want to do, let's do a little. I try to think of experiments I can do to not only tell me if some idea is good, but also so that I could learn. If you look at take physics as a great example. Physics is the science of understanding kind of the core principles of the universe. What are the core laws the universe runs by? How did the universe get born? Well, we know almost every new thing in physics from experiments. Even, the first people who were figuring out if the earth was flat or not, they conducted experiments of, I forget who it was, but he wanted to see, what angles the shadow of a tall object was at different times of the day. And then he can measure how circular the earth was. So all our knowledge, every time you improve your knowledge and your wisdom, it's because you're doing an experiment that teaches you something that you didn't know and maybe nobody knew, which is the nature of an experiment. Is you do it because you didn't know something. You do it because maybe nobody knows something. And that's how you build up. That's how you build skills. That's how you learn things. That's how that's how you learn things in a world with where information is a commodity. Like I could every fact in the world is 3 seconds away from me, but real knowledge and wisdom is not. And that's learned by experimenting and being creative about that and being flexible and not let any preconceived ideas rule your life. That's what you have to give up. You have to unlearn all the preconceived ideas that we're taught in school or we're taught from peer pressure or our family and so on.
Yeah. And money is no exception to that. I think, with money, we're taught at a very young age. We're taught to do certain things. We're taught to, operate in a specific environment when it comes to how we do things, how we earn a living, and not only how we earn a living, how we use money and how money is exchanged one way or the other. And a lot of what we are taught, we don't know this because it's all we know, is really a big lie. And you know this, and I know this just by being in the money space. I mean, what I did as an advisor for the 16 years that I did that on the Wall Street side, I know now that much of what we did there wasn't what people should do, but that's what we were taught to do. And when you're taught something and you come to believe it and you put the rosy colored glasses on, so to say, that's all there is. But then when that idea of what you've been taught and what you've been doing is challenged by something different, now all of a sudden you have to make a decision. You have to make a decision to either experiment or take this newfound knowledge and do your due diligence, or say, is this new knowledge real or is it not real? And it's so easy to do in today's world. I mean, you have things like Google, there's the resources are there, but so many people are scared to look at these new ideas because they're so used to the old ideas that have kept them trapped in the little square box that we call the life we live. And, back in the day, and I love this, this is something that you talk about a lot. Back in the day, it was very easy with careers. Our grandparents, even maybe our parents, had a very clear trajectory for their careers. Early on, they just worked, wherever their family did, or they took over the family business, or they went to school for a specific occupation that maybe their parents said that they should do. But those days don't really exist anymore. Things are changing. I wouldn't say we're in unprecedented times, but we're definitely in changing times. And in those changing times, industries that used to be rock solid disappear. Job descriptions change overnight. You one day are secure in your job, the next day, i.e. COVID, which just happened a year ago, your job no longer exists or has changed dramatically. And now all of a sudden you're forced to go back and figure these things out. And not only that, and you mentioned this earlier, people's interests and their passions evolve. I think we're in a period where now those passions change, and we really have to make a decision in our lives. Are we going to do something that we don't enjoy doing just because maybe it pays us, or we think that that's the only way we're going to be able to pay our bills? Or are we going to chase something that we're truly passionate about? I know for me, my whole life, not always, but for most of it, I've chased my passion, whether it was, when I was a pro snowboarder, the financial advisory thing it was kind of an experiment for me. I'm like, well, I'm a snowboarder, a punk snowboard kid. Like, let's try this Wall Street thing. And I tried it because I watched Wall Street with Michael Douglas. I'm like, that's pretty freaking cool. I've never had money and this dude got money. So let's see what that's like. So everything was always constantly changing. And the thing I love is you talk about riding the wave and, comfortable with the uncertainty. We have to get comfortable with uncertainty because that's all there is today is uncertainty. And I'm just queuing you up because these are all things that you talk about.
Sure.
And navigating the rough waters. And most importantly, pursue the things that interest you. And I always take that one step further. And I say, what would you do if you didn't get paid? What would you love to do, even if you didn't get paid a penny for doing it? I always say that's where you go.
And I think that's, it's tricky. It's tricky advice because no matter what, there's opportunity cost for everything. So, I've been an entrepreneur most of these years. By the way, when I was doing, I ran hedge funds. I ran a hedge fund and I ran a venture capital firm and I ran a fund of hedge funds and I've managed family office money. And I've pretty much been miserable the entire time I've had my hands on other people's money.
You don't say.
And it's just a miserable business, particularly the wealthier they are, the more annoying they are. And I just hated it. But and I didn't even really make that much money from it. I made more money being an entrepreneur and building something that was valuable and selling it. And I made more money investing in entrepreneurs with my own personal money. But there, in 2015, I think it was, I decided, oh, you know what? I really love stand-up comedy. I want to be a stand-up comedian.
Saw that.
And everyone's like, oh, you can't do that. You're like whatever years I was then, 46 years old or something. You can't do that. You're too old. You're too this, like wait in line, blah, blah, blah. And I did it for the last, 6-7 years, however long it's been. And, everybody who said can't was wrong. Usually when someone says you can't do this, it means they can't do it. And they just don't want you to go beyond where they were. Or maybe they even have good intentions. They're afraid you'll fail and whatever. Who knows? But I did it. I've toured all over the world. I'm not saying I'm good or not, but I put in the time to really learn a skill that I loved beyond anything. And it was a very difficult skill. And now I look back on it and sometimes I wonder, if I had, I've done okay, but if I had stuck with doing entrepreneurial stuff all the time I put into comedy, if I had just been doing entrepreneurial stuff, maybe I would have made like $1 billion or whatever. And but then you look back and like it's a cliche, but you really do. You can't get those years back. You only live once. I'm not going to do stand-up comedy now. I'm not as interested as I was 6 years ago. And I don't want to travel all over the world. And, I want to just relax a little bit. I'm a little older. And it was a valuable experience for me. I learned great skills. I had so much fun. I met an entire new subculture for me. It's very different than the hedge fund world or the tech world or the entrepreneur world or the writing world. It's a new subculture. And I don't regret it, but I do regret it a little bit. Like, also would have been nice to try to maybe see what I would have done entrepreneurially. I just wasn't interested. And when you do what you love, your life becomes valuable. There's another important thing about doing what you love that's very technical, which is that you people always wonder, should you do what you love or should you do what makes money? The problem is that everything you do in life requires energy. That's why we sleep at night, so we have more energy. That's why we try to eat nutritionally. That's why we try to exercise. That's why we try to not waste energy on, bad relationships. But everything takes energy, and you need to succeed. You're competing against other people, no matter what industry it is, whether it's business, hedge fund, comedy, tennis, music. You're always competing against the other people who are doing it. Now, if you're doing something you don't love, part of the energy when you sit down, let's say you're writing a novel and you don't love writing, you just want to be a big famous novelist. When you sit down to write, you need to take some energy to convince yourself to write for that day, particularly if you don't love it. If you love it, you don't need that energy. You could put that energy into the writing, into the creativity. And guaranteed the winners will be the people who maximize their energy. They didn't need that extra energy to convince themselves to do something because they loved it. So I do think it's important to love what you do, but also you build love by doing it. So it's a circle. Like the more you do something, sometimes you hate at that moment because it could be a miserable experience trying to get good at something, but you have to have you build an overriding love as you have more and more achievements, and achievements feed love, love feeds achievements, and so on. So that's a long answer to that, but that's what I have found. And so if I tried to be entrepreneurial, but I really was loving stand-up comedy, I probably would not have been good at it those 6 years.
Well, I think, yeah, I think that's interesting that you did it for as long as you did, because obviously, stand-up comedy, I'm sure you can make a lot of money at it, but I think you were just doing it because you loved doing it. And there's a
I
lot.
loved it. And I had started, fortunately, I had started a business that was doing well, like right before then. So that business was running on auto. It probably could have done better, but, because I was spending so much time doing comedy, but maybe not. Maybe because I was doing something that fed my soul, I was more able to build the business. Who knows in retrospect?
Yeah,
But I do look back and wonder about decisions I make.
it's tough to kind of parallel that and say, okay, well, what did this happen because I did what I loved, or did I do what I loved because something else happened? And I don't know if we're really supposed to figure that stuff out, but I think once we figure out something that lights us up inside and fuels that creative, side of us, I think at that point we're on the right track. And then if we can just take, and look at other people that have been successful in the realm of where we want to go, I think a lot of people model what they do from people that aren't living the life that they want to live. I live everything based on what my perfect day is. Everything I'm doing is working toward living the perfect day. But, eventually you get to be able to live that perfect day. If you think about it every day and you draw it and you can articulate what a perfect day looks like, eventually you're going to live that, because that's all your mind knows. You literally can bend reality and trick your mind to believing that that's where you have to be. So your mind will get you there. Anything you ask of life will provide for you if you stay the course. But eventually, once you get to that perfect day, James, the hardest part is so many people get there and they've arrived. They think I've worked this hard and I've made it and I have all the things that my perfect day did, and they stop. And then the only way to go once you've hit the arrival syndrome is back down to the bottom, which you and I have clearly both done. We've made money and lost it, made money and lost it. And I think a lot of that is because we've arrived. You can't ever arrive.
It's exactly what you said too. It's like when you feel like you've arrived, that's when you know you haven't arrived.
Exactly. Then you got to set the bar higher or do something else or look elsewhere, because you have to always be changing the destination.
There's got to be a better way to say. I was just thinking though, there's got to be a good quotable way to say that. Like, just when you think you've arrived, that's when you're the most lost. Something like that. So, but it's really true, and it's like, and you never know in the middle of it what's going on. So you kind of have to have you have to have faith and growth. Like you have to always be experimenting, growing, discuss. Learning is not about accumulating knowledge. Maybe it used to be. I don't know. I still don't think that was learning. But again, we've discussed how information is a commodity now. Like Google knows everything, but discovery is real learning. So you constantly have to be discovering new things about yourself, about the world, about the skills that you want to learn, about the activities you love. Discovery is how you do it. Like I just wrote, there's a book coming out, I think today or tomorrow, actually. It's called Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner. It's by Brian Keating, who has a podcast where he interviews Nobel Prize winners, and he's he's a Nobel Prize loser, which he'll gladly describe. But he wrote a book which compiled these interviews. Think Like a Nobel Prize Winner. He asked me to write the foreword for it. And one thing I noticed about all these Nobel Prize winners is that they were insanely curious. They just like, now they were insanely curious about physics and the universe, but I think you can be a physicist of your life. You should be insanely curious about you, about what you're interested in, what you love doing. And then you conduct experiments to see, and you want them to be easy. You want them to be cheap. You want them to take not so much time because you don't want to devote your life to 6 years to something that you didn't love. You realize you didn't love it, or that you're not good at it. And, so you do little experiments here and there to learn and get better. And, I think that, again, I think that's the key to bouncing back is making sure your idea muscle is flowing, keeping all the damaging energy things out of your life, and constantly experimenting, both to learn and to discover and to build skills. Like, as an example, let's say you play tennis. I don't play tennis, so this could be a bad example, but maybe you've watched on the TV screen. Sometimes people play close to the net. Sometimes people play far away from the net. So next time you play tennis, you do a little experiment. You try to play at the net every single shot. And that's how you get better at it. You discover what you were bad at, what you were good at. And it's frustrating. Anything worth doing well is going to be frustrating at least 50% of the time as you challenge yourself. And you just do little experiments. Or comedy is a great example. Oh, does this joke work? I'll go to a small club and I'll try out the joke. Oh, it didn't work. But I think I watched the recording of myself doing a video of myself doing the joke. Oh, it seems like I stuttered a little bit. Let me try it again without the stuttering. And, you try different personas while you tell the joke, and gradually you figure out, does this joke work? Does it not work? And you become a better comedian as a result. You don't just find a good joke. You actually become a better comedian and a better you, really, the more experiments you do.
That's great. And I think a lot of people are trying to be perfect in other people's eyes. And, I was at this event speaking last week and I came up with this quote, and I don't know where it came from. You ever just like something just comes out of your mouth and you're like, holy crap, let me repeat that. And then I wrote it down, but I said, I'm not
it just happened. Just when you think you've arrived, you discover you're hopelessly lost.
Absolutely. And I said this, and what I said for this quote that I'm going to start using is, I'm not here to be perfect. I'm here to serve a purpose. And whether that ever goes anywhere or not, but I think there's a lot of meaning in that. Perfection is something we'll never have. The arrival, we're never going to arrive at that point. And if you do, you're just going back down to the bottom. You can't arrive. You have to just keep climbing and keep going up, because that's what makes life interesting. And we always have to know, what are we pursuing? What is that passion? What is that one defining thing that we're after that lights us up? For me, it's giving. It's teaching other people how to solve their money problems. That's what lights me up. Now, that might not be the flavor for you, James. It might not be the flavor for our listeners here today, but we got to figure out, what is it that lights us up that you would do even if you didn't get paid for it? Then you might be on the right path, because if then you can figure out how to get paid to do that 3-4 layers deep, it might not be on the surface, but now all of a sudden you're doing something you love. Maybe it's comedy for you. Maybe for athletes, it's, whatever sport they pay. Even if they don't get paid, they don't stop playing baseball. They don't stop skateboarding. They don't stop surfing just because they can't get paid for it. That's what they love.
Yeah. Let's say you're a skateboarder. Okay. And the best
clearly am. If anyone that's listening, I've got a giant bandage on my hand. That was from this weekend's little skateboarding accident.
Oh yeah, that's really cool. How old are you, Chris?
44.
44, man. And like, you see skateboarders, they're mostly just young kids and stuff, because that's when you basically, there's the saying, when a kid can fall and not break all his bones. But we're starting to get that age, or you're starting to get that age. I'm past that age. You're starting to get that age where you're gonna fall, you're gonna hurt yourself
every weekend.
But that's cool that you're doing it. But let's say you now wanted to make money skateboarding. You're not going to compete in the skateboarding, X Olympics or whatever they're called, X sports thing, because you're too old. But does this mean you can't make a living from skateboarding? No. You could, for instance, find skateboarders all over the place and Twitch live stream them while they're doing their stuff. And you could build a real brand as like, the older guy who's seeking out like the best skateboarders in the world and live streaming them on Twitch. I know people on Twitch making that are completely unknown, but making over $1 million a year because they found their niche that they love, and their love, you could see it through their live streams, and you pay them, and people pay them. Now, it hasn't always been like there wasn't always Twitch, but there's almost always been ways to find opportunities now more than ever. So, like for instance, I play chess. I watch people on Twitch who are playing chess, and some of them are not good chess players. Some of them are the best in the world. Some of them are medium, and some of them are making millions a year. Even if they're not the best in the world, they're making more than the top 10 players are making because they're live streaming it, and they have, 1 million viewers.
We're always so focused on our problems, solving our problems, solving what it is that we think we need to fix. But we really are missing the boat if we're not focusing our life and our work on solving somebody else's problem. Because if we just do that, our problem gets solved automatically. It's such an easier passion. And you've got a book, Skip the Line. You've got you've got 20 books, James, but like talking about Skip the Line, can we just hit a little bit on that? Because it's something I don't know anything about, and I'm curious. Why is this book 20 or is this book 21?
Book 25, actually.
I missed the boat.
Yeah, it's funny. I just moved into a new place, and for the first time, I'm setting up a little book. I feel like I'm going to stay in this place, and I'm setting up a bookshelf with my shelves, and I'm having a hard time even finding all my books, like in on Amazon or different places and so on. So I don't even own all my books, but Skip the Line is I would say my most practical book, in the sense that there are a lot of books about, well, you mentioned it before, during COVID, 55 million people got laid off. Like the job wasn't secure, and people started finding their passions. But like I've encountered, and I'm sure everyone's encountered, there's plenty of people out there who tell you you can't do something or don't even try. And so kind of part of my book is how at any age you could switch passions, you could want to learn new things, and you could maybe not be the best in the world, but you could be in the top 1%, which is good enough to make a living at. So for instance, if there's 100 million skateboarders in the world out of 6 billion people, it's hard to be in the top 10. It's hard, like you said, it's hard to be Tony Hawk. But to be in the top 1% means you just need to be in the, top million. And that's good enough to potentially have the knowledge and interests and connections into the subculture to make a living at it. And there's a lot of books about learning, but I think I'm very interested in the idea of not just learning about adults that have other things on their mind, that are switching passions, that have other careers, that they also can achieve mastery at whatever it is they love. But I see books about learning, and I see books about making money, but once you are in the top 1% of something you love, why not make money at it? And so I also show in this book all the different ways you can monetize your passion and build your skills to be in the top 1% and then monetize it. So for instance, what we've been talking about with skateboarding is a technique I call the spoke and wheel technique. So the wheel is the skateboarding, but then you find multiple spokes. Now, most people think, oh, if you're the best skateboarder in the world, then you can make money at it. Okay, well, that's one spoke. But what about being a financial advisor to skateboarders? Or what about being a kind of an influence manager for skateboarders? So like you connect them up to brands and you kind of broker those, being sort of like an agent or manager. Or what about what we talked about before? You could be a live Twitch, expert and on skateboarding and monetize that way. Or you could write books, think like a skateboarder and interview the top 10 skateboarders in the world and publish that, and every skateboarder will buy that book. So this is where coming up with ideas is important, because there are a lot of spokes to a wheel, and this is how you diversify income streams. This is how you try and experiment with different things and see which one works to make money, and so on. So with every field there are things like that. So again, Skip the Line is about not just learning something at an advanced stage, but mastering it, and not just making a little bit of money, but even potentially building real wealth in whatever area you love is. And I have very specific techniques that I've used. So I don't really give advice. I just say what I've done, because I've switched interests and passions so many times in my life. Like you for skateboarding, you've been doing that since you were a kid, is me with chess. So lately I've been, this past, probably since the Queen's Gambit, the TV show, I got excited about chess for the first time in 24 years and decided I want to get really good again, because I was good as a kid and I want to even be better than I ever was. Well, I'm using the techniques from my book and it's been working wonderfully. And, can I monetize it? I'm absolutely sure I can. And then I just got to decide if that's something I want to do or not. But that's what Skip the Line is really about. And again, Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 10,000 hour rule to master something. I don't believe in that rule at all. It's when you're 40 years old or 50 years old, you don't want to spend 10,000 hours learning something. But I believe in the 10,000 experiment rule. It's really more like, my publisher wanted to call it that, but I'm really more like the 100 experiment rule. If you do 100 good experiments in whatever area you love, you will be at a master level of that area. That I'm pretty convinced that, and I've seen it over and over and over again. I mean, I'll give you a classic example. Before, I think it was around 1968, if you were in the high jump, if you were an athlete in the high jump, you would run towards the bar and you would jump over it in a traditional way, like you try to throw your legs over the bar forwards. And there was this guy, Dick Fosbury, who was in high school or first year of college, something like that, and his legs were really long, so he would always hit the bar and then it would be disqualified. So he decided to do something different. He did an experiment. He jumped backwards, and his coach said, "This is ridiculous. Maybe it works now, but it's not going to work in the Olympics." He won the gold medal that year. He went from being like the worst high jumper to the best in the world, creating all sorts of records. And now at the last Olympics, or pretty much right after this, it's now called the Fosbury flop, named after him. And that's how everybody does the high jump now. He did an experiment. He discovered something new. He became the best in the world, and because of it, and left a legacy in that sport. Or let's say you're not going to win the Olympics, like me with chess, for instance. Okay, I used to play one opening, but that was like rote learning. So I decided, I'm going to experiment. I'm going to learn other openings and expand my repertoire of how I open the game. And that one experiment has done incredible things for my deepening my understanding of the game. So there's always ways to experiment. Or with investing. Okay, first I was interested in growth and tech investing. Then I was interested in value investing. Then I was interested in arbitrage. Then I was interested in deeper things like, how much risk should I take? And this turned out to be a critical thing. Everyone says entrepreneurs and investors are risk takers. It's not true.
Not at all.
Entrepreneurs, we all know the rewards of entrepreneurship. I don't need to be taught that. I need the 99% of the job of an entrepreneur is risk mitigation, reduce risks. Same thing with investing. There's rewards on Wall Street. You don't have to take risks. The rewards are there. To win the game, you have to stay in the game. So you just have to reduce risk with everything you do, and you will make incredible wealth.
Wow, James, nobody's ever put it that way, but, it relates back to, right now, I'll go back to, I say this often, Bezos, the richest man in the world, had asked one of the other richest men in the world, Warren Buffett. He said, "What you do with investing is so simple, Warren. Why doesn't everybody just copy and do what you did?" Warren, without blinking, looks back at Bezos and says, "Because everybody's in a rush." Isn't that the truth? Warren Buffett is one of the richest men in the world, not because he's a great stock picker, not because he does unbelievable fundamental analysis and really knows his way around. Sure, he does, but so do a lot of other people. The reason he's so wealthy is time. That's the only reason. He's put the time in. He is invested for the long haul, but yet everybody right now is looking for this easy out, this quick get rich quick thing. And that get rich quick thing in almost probably 99.9% of the time ends in failure, because you can't be in a rush. You just said it. I love how you put that.
Look at a great example of, Warren Buffett is a great example. As you point out, I've written a book, Trade Like Warren Buffett. I wrote it in 2004 or 2005. And he was all about reducing risk. Again, he knew
100%.
he knew that there was money if you invest in Wall Street, but like he would only buy when he first started out. He doesn't do this now because he has different techniques for reducing risk. But when he
Hedging and
first
everything
started
else.
out, he would only buy stocks that he could liquidate if he wanted to for more than what he bought them for. And meaning like if a factory was worth 30 million, but the stock was worth 15 million, he would buy that stock. So he called these cigar butt stocks. And it was an incredible way to reduce risk. Those kind of stocks don't really exist as much right now, but that's how he reduced risk. And he made, his first million that way. And it's just interesting. It's with entrepreneurship too. You have to always think about reducing risk because that's where the money is. So you don't waste too much time on something, that you're flexible, you have time for creativity. You just have to reduce risk.
I love that. And, I know we're going long on this, but I do want to just hit this one thing because now we're on this risk button. With investing, I think it's a unique time in history. And I parallel it back. I'm a nerd. That's the only word you can use with history. And I study economic periods and patterns and everything else. And you go back to 1926 to 1929, that one specific period, because I feel like that mimics where we're at right now. People today, millennials and the large part of the population, have never seen anything but a bull market. They've never seen anything but a market that just goes up. So that's why you keep hearing a lot of I call them the Robin Hooders or the meme stalkers. They're always pointing and it's going to the moon. But back in 1929, that same terminology was being used. There were stock pickers back then. One woman, I can't think of her name right now, but she was always saying this stock's going to the moon. And then we all know what happened after that. It didn't go to the moon. The whole stock market crashed. They call it the Great Depression, but most people don't even know what the Great Depression entailed, what it meant, and what it did to people's lives. Very much like 2008, not that long ago. I mean, me and you look at 2008 like it was yesterday. Millennials don't even know what 2008 was. They're like, oh, it was some recession thing. And, my parents had a hard time, but they have never seen anything but a bull market. And right up into today, nothing makes sense. I mean, Warren Buffett's not buying a darn thing right now because fundamentally he can't make sense of any of this. But Warren Buffett is also a patient man and will wait for the opportunity to come, which most people in today, they're all in a rush. So they're not waiting. They're just piling in to what I would say is a overly speculative, highly risky market to invest in unless you know how to navigate these waters, as you would say. Where are people making mistakes in these markets today? What should be maybe just a couple rules they should be following, to maybe be more like investing like Warren Buffett or some of the other, ones like Ray Dalio. I mean, we could go on for days with names, but I just feel like people are walking themselves off a cliff right now and they don't even realize it because they don't realize what happened in the past and what will happen again. Can you just say a couple words on that? I think it's something that's on everybody's mind, but nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people wonder like, oh, is the market going to crash? Is the market going to go up? And yeah, there are times when everything falls, like 2008. But usually, even in a bear market, there are some stocks that go up and some stocks that go down. Like in 2001 was a recession, and the market went down. S&P went down 20% for 2 years in a row, I think. But value stocks went up. Tech stocks went down, and stocks like Exxon went up. And so I think really the important thing there is if you find good companies and keep each position small and understand real diversification, then you could make money in the markets. You don't have to find the best companies. You don't have to find that secret micro penny stock that's going to be the next Amazon. But you have to understand that you don't risk all your money on one thing. And by the way, diversification is different now than it was 20 or 30 years ago. It used to be Exxon was diversified from Microsoft. One was a tech stock, one was a oil stock. But now, because of ETFs that are buying the entire market at the same time or selling the entire market at the same time, Exxon and Microsoft are sort of now correlated with each other. So you have to look at other asset classes, like maybe you buy some stocks, maybe you buy a home, maybe you buy some commodities. I don't know. I'm not a big fan of commodities. Maybe you buy Bitcoin or whatever. Again, don't buy things you don't understand and don't take too many risks. Like for me, my own personal portfolio, I tend to try to buy private companies because they're not always at the whims. You don't see their price every day, so they're not at the whims of a market. And I don't make any investment that's more than 1 to 3% of my net worth. And, depending on your risk tolerance, you could either change that and depending on your age, if you're younger, you could do a little bit more than that per investment. But I don't think too much about whenever I see something in the news, like, oh, the stock market's going to fall, or the stock market's going to boom, or China is going to take over, or inflation, blah, blah, blah. They might be right, but A, they might be wrong. And B, let's say inflation's happening, which it either is or it isn't. It still doesn't tell you really how to invest. All it means is that you probably should invest because you don't want to hold, you'd rather hold an investment than a dollar if inflation's going up. But, everything you have to figure out kind of on your own and just be diversified as possible, and try not to listen to the latest hype or, like the wrong time to buy tech stocks was when everybody was buying tech stocks. So, I don't know how to predict things, but I just know that if I manage risk and not feel like, oh, I better buy now or else it's too late.
Yep.
That's the worst emotion you could feel. It's never too late. So you just have to buy when you don't feel that kind of anxiety, though. I don't know if that really answers your question.
It's amazing advice. Yeah. Don't buy into FOMO. Don't buy into the fear you're going to be missing out on something if you don't take action today. And a lot of what you said, I would parlay back to just saying, trade with rules. Set your rules. Is it, never take a position more than whatever your rule is, a third of your net worth, or, an eighth of your net worth. Everybody's got their own rules. Like,
and by the way, day trading is different. Like with day trading, you have different rules than with, long-term private investment trading. And that you have different rules for stock or Bitcoin investments, or whatever it is you invest in. And I think the key thing is, by the way, the crowd is usually right, but not always. And it's those moments when you really can make some money, is when you feel like, oh, everybody's like so hyped up about something. Let's be flexible. You have to be always flexible. Like, I've written articles, you should never own a home. And I give financial reasons why, and I work out the math of owning versus renting, and I compare house market returns to stock returns. Well, I just bought a house, and I still feel the same way I do about home ownership. It's just that right now I am a little worried. I was living in an area where rents were going up 50% a year the past 2 years. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I could get priced out of, no matter how much money you have, if something's going up 50% a year, you're in trouble. So that made me want to own and tie at least one of my income streams to having an asset that will go up at least equal to inflation over the long run. And you learn that, you could see historically that's what's happened, is that housing has not beaten inflation, but it hasn't done worse than inflation. And that's a good way. Usually I'm against tying up so much of my net worth in one thing, which is, by the way, everyone who tells you a house is not an investment, that's a real estate agent who just wants you to buy a house. Of course, a house is an investment. It's the most important financial decision you'll probably make in your life. It's like a huge amount of money. And they just don't want you to think of it as an investment because they want you to make bad investments. So you have to do just as much research and due diligence on a house as any other investment, maybe more. I said a lot in that one.
That's thing. All right. I love it. I love it. So if people want to learn more about you and the 25 books you've written, if you can even like remember where they can get them all, I mean, like, what would be the best way for people to follow you? And can we just hit real quick on your podcast, because there's some really interesting things you say on that.
Yeah. So my podcast is the James Altucher Show, and I cover all sorts of things. Like, I've interviewed people ranging from Michael Dell and Richard Branson to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, who's the best basketball player in history, to Tiffany Haddish, who's a movie star, and all sorts of people, like Gary Kasparov, the former world chess champion, been on a bunch of times. And the podcast is really about mastery, but also I'm really interested in how people can make money. And so I'll interview people who quit being a lawyer in order to be what's called an affiliate manager, or start an online course, and I'll have them walk step by step how they made like $1 million from that. So I do a variety of different like sub series within my podcast.
Love that. So folks, make sure you check out James's podcast, and also make sure you get a hold of one of his books, especially this new one, Skip the Line. You're going to want to know what's in there, because in order to get into James's mind and way of thinking, you're going to have to get around the campfire a little bit and start learning. And, that goes back to the old wise tales, right? Get around the campfire. The eldest, person had the most wisdom, and they would just tell stories that then that's how others learned. And this is no different. Get around James's campfire via his podcast, his books, and don't stop learning. Follow your passion, folks.
I like the idea of calling it a campfire.
Mm-hmm. That's what we always call it.
Chris, thanks so much for having me on the podcast. It's a really great show, and I really enjoyed it. And I appreciate you calling me for this.
Thank you all for joining me. Make sure you just subscribe. We'll see you the next time.